The announcement came as no surprise. After all, the two men, well, there was a growing rift behind closed doors between them over Ousmane Sonko's eyeing the presidency, but also the management of the economy that has gone from bad to worse. Senegal's economy was booming. Now it's staggering. Now, the two men were once close friends, close allies. In fact, in opposition, they spent time in prison together. And when Sonko was disqualified to run for the presidency, well, he nominated Faye as his stand-in. Now President Faye is dismissing him as his prime minister. And that's after comments made at the National Assembly on Friday, where Ousmane Sonko was openly critical of the president's handling of the economy. There's also the controversial anti-homosexuality law, which is seen by critics as a smokescreen to hide his mismanagement of the economy, because Sonko has been trying to renegotiate big contracts with oil and gas companies, including BP, that has pulled out of the country. And then there's been the missing $7 billion missing out of state coffers, with the IMF staggering its disbursement of funds.
All right, welcome to This Week in Africa, your weekly live stream where we talk about all things Africa related. Today, we are talking about the headline story where there's a controversy in Senegal. President Faye fired Prime Minister Sonko. Of course, then Sonko then becomes, takes on a new political role. We'll talk about that. And also Traoré Nationalizes gold mines and more stories if we can get to them. But before we get into today's stories, let's do our introductions. I'll turn it over to our co-host before I introduce myself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gloria Ayo. I am the founder of Diaspora Station, and our aim is to bridge the gap between Africa and its diaspora through news, culture, and entertainment. But of course, as always, happy to be back.
Awesome. And I'm Joe Hitago, founder of Authentic African Media. Our goal is to help people visit, move, and invest on the continent of Africa. We do these live streams so that you know what's happening on the continent that you might be planning to visit, move, or invest in. Now, before we get into the rest of the stories, we'll catch back up on this particular story here. And I'll give you guys some context as to the video you just saw from Al Jazeera, and then we'll play a little bit more on the updates since then. So as mentioned in that video, Senegal's president, Faye, dismissed Prime Minister Sonko amid growing tensions over the economy, political ambitions, and rising living costs in the country. As you saw in that video, there was discussion of money going missing. You might remember that Diomaye Faye actually excluded himself from all future corruption trials that would be happening. So I think that is a very telling story. That is a very telling story, that is a very telling story, and I think it's a very interesting one. And so we will place another video which speaks to his role now. So let me mention this. So Sonko he was actually elected as the assembly president. So the previous assembly president stepped down, and Sonko was elected as the assembly president just days after he was let go from his post. So we are going to play a video from African News, which will speak to this, and then we'll have some commentary on the other side.
Senegal's National Assembly has elected ousted Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko as its speaker in a vote boycotted by the opposition. The move comes just 4 days after President Bassirou Diomaye fired Sonko as Prime Minister. Opposition lawmakers call his return to parliament illegal, accusing the ruling majority of engineering what they describe as an institutional coup. Sonko remains the dominant figure in Pastef, which controls 130 of the 165 seats in the single-chamber legislature. In Tuesday's vote, he won 132 ballots in his favor, with no votes against and one abstention. He was the sole candidate and received a long ovation. He replaces ally El Malick Ndiaye, who resigned on Sunday, clearing the way for Sonko's election. President Faye, seen as Sonko's former protege, now faces the challenge of delivering reforms in a country burdened by serious economic difficulties and heavy public debt, after appointing economist Amadou Al-Aminu Mohamed Lo as the new prime minister.
All right, so Gloria, your thoughts on the ousting, number one, of Sonko, and then him being now placed as the head of the National Assembly just days after the ousting in a landslide vote, as you heard there, 100 plus in favor, one abstention, and one no.
Yeah, so some background, and I need to go through this so I can explain why Senegal is where it is today.
So while you do that, I'll be right back.
Okay. So Sonko used to be in the Senegalese Revenue Administration. He worked in the Senegalese Revenue Administration, and he had the privilege of watching a system that actually would favor connected elites and international corporations while the masses suffered. And this inspired him to found Pastef. Pastef is the Patriots of Senegal for Work, Ethics, and Fraternity. And that was founded in 2014. Now, the main aim of Pastef was to demand for genuine sovereignty, particularly over the terms of Senegal's relationship with France and with international financial institutions, obviously, such as the IMF. In 2019, he came third in the presidential election, which people thought was actually really impressive for opposition. But at this point, Sonko had become a really strong voice. Matter of fact, it became the main voice of opposition. And Bassirou Diomaye Faye, his right-hand man, came into politics through Sonko's movement and became one of the founding members and eventually general secretary of Pastef. Now, I'm saying all this to let you know that this was not exactly an alliance of equals from the start. That was their foundation. Sonko was the architect of Pastef. So essentially, Faye owes his position to Sonko because at one point Sonko was his mentor, and he would have almost certainly taking the job of president had he not been barred from the presidential election due to a defamation conviction. Macky Sall, the former president, did everything he could to suppress Sonko, who at this point, again, had become the main voice of opposition. But the people got triggered more. People had been unalived. There were arrests. You know, at some point, they had even sentenced him in absentia in 2023, shortly after they found a creative way to arrest him, saying that he was corrupting the youth or something like that. And the people got triggered even more. More unalivements followed. I mean, the streets were filled with people supporting and protesting for Sonko to be released. And this happened because a lot of people believed in him, in his policies, or what he said would be his policies. They believed in his ideologies. They believed he would be one person who could actually help Senegal have sovereignty. So essentially, this is the foundation in which Faye presidency was born. At some point, Faye himself got arrested, but interestingly, the Constitution Court, in a move that surprised many people, were able to actually validate his run for presidency. So they now came up with a campaign slogan, which in itself was a political declaration, Diomaye Mui Sonko, which means Diomaye is Sonko. And basically what they were saying was the candidate on the ballot and the man who could not be on the ballot were basically the same project. Shortly after Faye, I mean, both of them were released from prison, but at this point, Faye could run. But the moral of the story is that Faye was able to run because Sonko was really loved by the Senegalese people. So in them voting for Faye, they knew they were voting for Sonko, or that was at least how it was presented. Anyway, after the government of Faye took power in April 2024, it became clear that Macky Sall, who was the former president, the one that had done everything he could to stop Sonko from being president, it became obvious that he had actually concealed enormous liabilities. There were a lot of hidden loans from the Senegalese people Even the IMF was was blindsided. So at this point, the IMF froze a $1.8 billion lending program following the discovery of this misreported debt that had been hidden by South's government. And this actually pushed the country's end 2024 debt level to 132% of its economic output. So clearly now Senegal is in debt. Faye is president. Oh, and I didn't mention that he did appoint Ousmane Sonko as his prime minister. So both of them at this point, because the truth is, even offline, Joe and I had talked about, and I asked the Senegalese at the airport one day, I was like, when he told me he was from Senegal, I was like, are you impressed with your government? So I think Joe had also shared some thoughts that some Senegalese people had. I personally was concerned because I was rooting, and I'd even spoken up for Ousmane Sonko to be released and Sonko and Faye to be allowed to run. So after all the high, everybody being excited, is like, okay, so now what's going on in Senegal? And I'm not hearing anything major coming out. I know Faye did go to Trump. He went to the White House to sit at the table and ask Trump how he did it, being such a peacemaker on earth and all. So I wasn't just wowed. And obviously a lot had been brewing financially. They had different opinions on how to run the economy. They had Faye's government insisted on fuel subsidy, but Sonko said no, that's not fair. We're going to make the working poor. We're going to get them more in debt. There were many things that Sonko, and I have to give credit to him because these were the things he had always talked about, and that was basically what he was defending. So the big one was that homosexuality law, anti-homosexuality law, however they framed it. When Ousmane Sonko recently said the West is trying to impose same-sex relations on the rest of the world, shortly after he got dismissed. So people are wondering, is it because you don't want to, piss off the IMF? You don't want to, piss off international financial institutions that you think are needed right now to help Senegal build? I mean, I understand the concerns, but at the end of the day, no path was going to be easy anyway. Before you come into power, you have your ideologies. These were the things Sonko had always preached about. Then you come in and it's like you're singing a different song. How do you expect? I like that the man stood on his principle. That's my opinion anyway. I like that he stood on principle till the end. And we have to respect the fact that Sonko is a very bright, very, very smart man. He's very strategic. It was the same strategy that brought Faye into power. So if now you're wondering whether or not he's been in parliament is illegal and all that, well, that is Sonko. That is the man who ideally should have been president. But I think the next election is going to be very interesting. But Joe, I am really disappointed at how this all turned out. I had such high hopes for Senegal. Not a fan of this moment.
Yeah, well said. And I will add to that by saying, as you just said, look, these two were in opposition of the previous government together. They were like hand in hand, and Faye was Sonko's like second in command. His understudy, you could say maybe he was his he was like next in line. And because Sonko was disqualified and unduly arrested, it only allowed for Faye to run. And so Sonko then could become prime minister. And then for those of you who are from the West and are trying to figure out like the order of operations, almost like he's the prime minister. So, right, he's the head of all the ministers, but also could be seen as like the vice president, sort of. Yes. Now that he's out of that role, his role looks more like Speaker of the House. So if you've ever seen, for those of you who are from like the States, and you've ever seen the president speak, then you see the vice president, and then that third person behind them, that's usually the Speaker of the House. And that is just the succession, right? So if something happens to the president, something happens to the vice president, the next person in line is nobody else in the cabinet, it's the Speaker of the House. And from what I understand, in Senegal, that works this same way, right? So it'll be the president, then whoever is the prime minister that, and his name is escaping me, that Faye just appointed. And then beyond that is this position that Sonko is in today. So he has become the third most powerful person in the country after being ousted as being the second most powerful. And the only even reason why the president is in office in the first place is because Sonko was the one with all of the ideas and the platform. And so I think it's really interesting. I wanted to give everybody that context, but I am disappointed. As you said, there were a lot of moments along the way that I think many of us scratched our head at, side-eyed, etc. In this president of Diomaye Faye, or Faye, however people say his, different people say it different ways. I would say that the biggest disappointment to me has been the money going missing, and then almost just weeks after that, the dismissal of the person who you say was your mentor, who is the reason why you were even elected. And it feels to me like there are external pressures, or maybe even his own decision to about face for all the things that he ran on. And this is the thing that Africans have become so fed up with on the continent, right? Is the fact that for so long, it goes so long between we have leaders that people can believe in, that like drums up that kind of a groundswell in support. And then almost always it ends in disappointment. And in this case, Senegal was like, finally, we have a person, we have a team of folks. And because Sonko was the prime minister, the thought was he could always help to ensure that the policies that they had run on would be put into place. Unfortunately, as you can see, he was ousted, but I'm happy that he's the head of the National Assembly. We will see if that leads to continued pushing on, Faye to continue with the policies that they ran on. We will keep a close eye and keep you guys abreast of the situation as things come to fruition and as things change. Now, from a disappointment to what many people have been saying around the world is the bright light of West Africa, or Africa in general. We're now moving on to Burkina Faso, and Traoré turning Burkina Faso's gold mines into state-backed national assets. So the government under Traoré is tightening state control over the country's multi-billion-dollar gold industry, reshaping ownership and reducing foreign dominance in the sector. Reports suggest more industrial gold mines are now controlled by Burkinabe companies and the state, while new mining reforms aim to keep more profits inside the country. So Traoré's administration is also building a sovereign investment fund to channel gold revenues into long-term industrial development. So this strategy comes as Burkina Faso battles insurgents and rising economic pressure. So analysts say that the country is becoming one of the clearest examples of Africa's growing wave of resource nationalization. So we'll play this video from First Post, and we'll give you some commentary on the other side.
Traoré is rewriting the profit norms of the country's gold wealth. The military government has taken control of key gold assets, expanding the state ownership in the mining sector. It is now trying to keep gold profits worth billions inside the country. Reports suggest that 6 of Burkina Faso's 15 active industrial gold mines are now majority owned by Burkinabe companies. 3 of those mines are under direct state control. It marks a major change for the country, as foreign firms dominated Burkinabe gold industry for decades. Before Traoré's military administration came to power, only 1 industrial gold mine in Burkina Faso was controlled by a local company. Today, the state and local investors are rapidly increasing their presence in the sector, and foreign mining companies are steadily losing ground. But the ownership shift is only the first half of the strategy. Traoré's government is also reportedly building a new state-backed investment fund called the Sinyangigi, which translates to preparing for tomorrow. Now, the idea is simple. When global gold prices rise, the state will save profits instead of spending it immediately. Officials say that the money earned will be used for long-term projects like roads, factories, and industrial development. The projects could reportedly begin next year.
All right, we will leave it there. But Gloria, your thoughts on what is happening in Burkina Faso and how they're taking their mineral assets and turning it into industrialization and forward progress for the country?
Yeah, so Burkina Faso was one of the last countries in West Africa where foreign mining companies essentially ran the show without any major challenge or anything like that. For decades, you had multinationals from Canada, Australia, from Europe that held industrial mining licenses. They were extracting gold. They were paying taxes and royalties at rates that were negotiated under investment codes that people actually insisted were more in favor of certain elites who took the overwhelming share of profits back to their countries. So foreign companies historically controlled most industrial gold production and retained much of the profits. Meanwhile, gold in Burkina Faso actually accounts for roughly, or should I say accounted for, roughly 70% of their export earnings. And the country consistently ranked among the world's poorest people despite sitting on significant gold reserves. This is why when people say they are for Ibrahim Traoré, they're for any leader who's able to focus on sovereignty for Africa or for their country, this is why people rally around people like that. And but if we're connecting this with what's going on in Senegal, I'm all for the push for sovereignty of Africa. I've said this time and time again. Burkina Faso has partnered with Russia and other countries that seem to be more interested in a partnership, an equal partnership. But we haven't had that from the West. And him doing this is, again, as I said about Sonko, you're standing on principle, you're standing on your ideology, you're standing on that which you said you would do. So I say yay to Traoré for this and yay to the people of Burkina Faso. Great move towards sovereignty. Imagine if this is replicated throughout the continent. Just imagine where Africa could be. Woo.
Absolutely. Look, look, there's so many different things that you can applaud about this. Number one, making sure the natural resources are impacting the country in a couple different ways. I thought it was really interesting that number one, you understand that the price of gold is going to go up. So those profits can go right back into infrastructure projects, right? Which puts people to work, which also improves the country, which means that more people would want to come to the country. And it has like kind of an ongoing impact of growing the economy. Two, I thought what was also interesting is the fund that they are working to continue to grow. Because obviously funds are necessary. You guys may have heard of sovereign wealth funds. Different countries have different funds. And different countries have different funds. And as I mentioned, those funds have been used to help countries continue to grow in power and in their ability. So in their ability to continue to increase their place on the global stage, right? So that's super important. Also, and then the last thing I'll mention too, beyond those two things, nationalizing these businesses and local businesses. So I think there's always a concern with nationalizing resources because, what happens if another person comes into power and they misuse or abuse, etc. So you'll notice that it wasn't just nationalizing, but it was nationalizing it, and also local Burkina companies are taking part in these gold mines. And so it's not just nationalizing it. There's also a private sector element to this as well. So there's a multi-tiered benefit for the people within the country. So all of those things obviously are things that we need to see so that other presidents on the continent could potentially continue to attempt to do, right? It's something that people can run on, that it can inspire others who never thought about running for office to be able to have an example to look at and give them a platform to run on. So for all those reasons, I'm applauding what he's doing, and I think it's really important that he is doing it. So kudos to him for what he's done in this short amount of time. Now, with that, I do want to get to at least one more story. We want to speak to Kagame signing a nuclear deal with Trump and Putin at the same time. So just a little bit more context for that. He is pursuing what people are calling a high-risk geopolitical balancing act by building nuclear partnerships with both Donald Trump's administration and Vladimir Putin's administration at the same time. Kigali has signed a civil nuclear cooperation deal with Washington and Washington and U.S. firm Holtec, while Russia's Rosatom is expanding its own nuclear footprint in Rwanda. So the competing deals come as Western pressure mounts over Rwanda's role in eastern DRC, and Kagame appears determined to turn basically this power rivalry into strategic leverage, using both Moscow and Washington to advance Rwanda's long-term energy ambitions and geopolitical influence across Africa. So we'll play this video, and then we'll have some commentary on the other side.
Try to avoid. He is building nuclear ties with both Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin at the exact same time. And by doing so, he could make Rwanda one of Africa's most strategic countries in the decades ahead. This week in Kigali, Rwanda signed a new civil nuclear cooperation deal with the United States. The agreement was signed during the Nuclear Energy Innovation Summit for Africa. Washington says the partnership will support peaceful nuclear development, including energy security, nuclear safety, and non-proliferation standards. Right alongside the US government deal, an American energy giant called Holtec International signed a separate contract with Rwanda's Atomic Energy Board. Their goal is to deploy advanced small modular reactors, or SMRs. SMRs.
All right, we get into many more details there. If you guys want to dig into the details of that, feel free. But your thoughts, Gloria, on what some people are calling strategic, some people are calling brilliant. Others have other names for it. But your thoughts on Kagame's rivalry, or creating this rivalry in with these two deals, the strategic deals with both the U.S. and with Moscow.
Yeah, I guess, there are countries that they're not trying to align only with the West, or, in William Ruto's words, we look to the West. We're not looking to the West, we're not looking to the East, we're looking forward. But there are certain presidents who just prefer. I've even heard Ramaphosa, say he's interested in a multipolar world. He's not trying to pick one side or pick another side. I get that vibe with Kagame as well. I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing, but I just find that it's very interesting, because you have, people who are asking for Africa's sovereignty. They would rather, if you do go outside the continent, to align with countries like Russia and maybe even China. So to have him seeming, having both. See, at the end of the day, what this shows is that, it is of benefit to Rwanda as well, because Rwanda has 26,000 square kilometers of land, but it has no oil. It's actually landlocked. So it's always needed to actually depend on external aid for a significant share of its budget. It's had to depend on Western goodwill. We've talked about things as not as simple, as complicated as the deportation of migrants to Rwanda. Rwanda has been a hotspot for this. So these are, and of course, we know there's been some controversy with the DRC. It's just been a lot. So while I applaud the decision of Rwanda to, get creative and strategic as you use the word strategic that you used, in terms of trying to find as many partners that would benefit Rwanda, I do actually find it very interesting, having Russia and America coming to the table, even if they're coming in different ways. Of course, they're not necessarily working together, but just the fact that they're both being, the bottom line is, at the end of the day, it's all about Africa. Whether you're American, whether you're Russian, whether you're Chinese, you all know what is in that continent, what is under the earth And that's why everybody keeps coming back. So I'm not surprised to see something this, I guess, I don't want to use the word ridiculous, but something that you would never have expected to see. So here we are. But it's Africa that is the big, Africa is the denominator here. Africa is what they're all interested in.
Absolutely, and specifically Africa's resources, right? You know, they're not doing this out of the goodwill of their hearts, right? I mean, obviously helping with a nuclear program, and meaning nuclear, not nuclear weapons, but nuclear energy, comes at a cost. And as you said, Rwanda is landlocked. They don't have oil. They do have some other minerals, but they also have access to a lot of minerals that come out of the DRC. And so make with that what you will, right? But that obviously has a lot to do with a lot of the conversations that are happening between what's happening in Rwanda and the East and the West. Everybody is beginning to start to, well, not beginning, is continuing to fight for Africa's resources. And now the United States has just been blatant about why they care about Africa. Previously, it had been about aid and humanitarianism. With this current administration, they've made it very clear it's about the minerals, right? And so if there's a chance to do a trade, that's what they'll do. And it seems like Kagame is open to that. And he's willing to work with everybody. As you know, he's done the third party country deportees program with the United States. If I'm not mistaken, he was the first on the continent of Africa to do it, to execute on it. Obviously, he was part of a guinea pig program that never went live in the UK. So that didn't work out because of all the things under a previous administration. So I wouldn't expect any difference, you know, with this current administration in the United States willing to do something to this effect. You know, as you mentioned, ideally, we'd like to see Africa working with Africans. I do understand that nuclear energy is not something that is necessarily native to the continent. It's not something that the continent has done generally. So in those cases, you are going to have to partner with other folks who've done it on a broad scale and has made sure to minimize the number of nuclear meltdowns that they've had. But just remember, 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl did happen in the two countries Rwanda is working with to work on nuclear energy with. So it doesn't mean that there won't be any chances of any negative impacts, but hopefully both of those two countries have learned from those mistakes. And if they're bringing nuclear power to the continent, that these kinds of nuclear meltdowns don't happen, because we can't afford for that to happen in any continent, any country on the continent of Africa. And then beyond that, you know, we already know it's going to be a trade for something. So, you know, we'll find out more what that looks like as time goes on. I know that we're basically at time, and I really wish we could have gone through the rest of the stories because this keeps happening each week. As long as I'm in Sierra Leone, as you noticed, I'm in Sierra Leone. People knock and just open the door and just walk in while coming to do some work, even while you're on a live stream, even after you mentioned that you can't have people in. But anyway, this is what it's like to be on the ground here on the continent, specifically in West Africa, specifically in Sierra Leone. So bear with me. Sorry about the intrusion and interruption a little bit earlier. I have some screens being put on, and you guys got a chance to witness what somebody looks like walking in, just walking right in. But in any case, we do appreciate you guys being on as long as you have been on. We did see a number of people joining over the last like 15 minutes. As of next week, as far as I understand, I will no longer be in Sierra Leone. So we will likely be able to have the full hour, and we will likely be able to do a more deeper dive on some of these stories, at least from my end, hopefully. So stay tuned next week. Make sure you follow the Gloria Ayo across all platforms, and of course at the Diaspora or at Diaspora Station across all platforms. Make sure you follow Authentic African in all its iterations across all platforms. And if you haven't already, pick up some merch. Before Slavery, We Ruled. I don't know if you can see it, but
We can see it. Love it.
So if you haven't had a chance to pick it up, go to AuthenticAfrican.com. It is there for you. Any final words, Gloria, before we go?
No, thank you all for joining, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
All right, thanks. Bye, guys.